I want my baby home. If anybody know anything or seen anything, please reach out. I want my baby home bad.
A teenage boy rides his bike into the night and never comes home. 2 weeks later, police say he's dead, but they still don't have a body. They have blood. They have surveillance footage. They have a man who is already under arrest for something else entirely. And they have a story that gets darker every time a new piece of evidence comes out. This is a disappearance of Ja'Derrius Minnieweather, and what investigators say happened to him is something this Baton Rouge community will not be able to shake for a long time. Before we go further, I want to ask you for something. Cases like this only get solved because people keep paying attention. Families like Ja'Derrius's need the world to remember their child's name long after the headlines fade. If you're new here, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and like this video. Not for me, but for him. Every share keeps his story in front of someone who might know something. Let's get into it. Ja'Derrius Minnieweather was 15 years old, known around his Baton Rouge neighborhood, with a family that loved him enough to launch a search effort that would eventually stretch across nearly 1,000 acres of land.
50 miles plus on foot, 3,500 acres cleared, hundreds of dumpsters, hundreds of garbage cans, countless empty lots, countless buildings. Went in some places that are sketchy as you could imagine, just looking for Ja'Derrius Minnieweather. And he's got
On the evening of June 4th, he did something completely ordinary. He got on a small kid's bike and rode over to see a 16-year-old girl, someone described as a longtime friend. Nothing about that should have ended his life. But when the girl got back to her place, she wasn't alone. She arrived in a white pickup truck belonging to a 51-year-old man named Maurice Parms. And almost immediately, something shifted. Witnesses say a tense argument broke out. Minnieweather reportedly took issue with how Parms was behaving toward the teenage girl. We don't know the exact words exchanged. Whatever was said, it escalated into something far more violent than anyone could have predicted. Here's what makes this so unsettling. Parms wasn't a stranger plucked off the street. He was already known to this girl. Investigators would later uncover messages between the two of them, in which Parms allegedly referred to them as being in a relationship. There were Cash App payments. The girl told police she had met up with him multiple times, at his home, in his vehicles. He was 51. She was 16. That detail alone changes how you have to look at everything that follows. Because if Minnieweather walked into that confrontation simply trying to look out for his friend, then what happened to him next wasn't random violence. It was someone trying to protect somebody and paying for it with his life. Witnesses described hearing a tall man attacking a smaller person for several minutes. And in the middle of it, a softer voice, pleading, begging for it to stop. Police haven't confirmed exactly whose voice that was, but the image alone is enough to keep you up at night. By the next morning, Minnieweather was gone. Not gone like he'd run off somewhere. Gone like he'd vanished completely. And for weeks, nobody knew what had actually happened to him, until investigators started pulling apart a much bigger picture than anyone expected. To understand why this case unraveled the way it did, you have to go back to June 10th. Almost a week before anyone publicly connected Maurice Parms to a murder at all. At that point, he wasn't being investigated for killing anyone. He was arrested on a completely different charge: indecent behavior with juveniles and computer-aided solicitation of a minor. Think about that timeline for a second. Police were searching for a missing 15-year-old boy, and in the course of that search, they stumbled into evidence of something else entirely: an alleged inappropriate relationship between a 51-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl. That's not a coincidence investigators could ignore. That's the thread that pulled the entire case open. So, who was the man at the center of this? Publicly, not much is known about Maurice Parms before this case. He lived a short walk from where the confrontation reportedly happened. He had access to a white 2014 GMC Sierra and, according to the warrant, another vehicle as well. He had, allegedly, been cultivating a relationship with a teenage girl that involved repeated meetings and financial payments sent her way. That's the part that should unsettle you. Grooming cases rarely happen in a single dramatic moment. They build slowly, Through attention, gifts, secrecy, normalized contact that the people around the victim might not immediately recognize as dangerous. If the allegations here are accurate, this wasn't an isolated bad decision. It was a pattern, one that had been developing long enough to involve cash transfers and a self-described relationship. And Minnieweather, it seems, was someone who noticed. He wasn't just a bystander in this story. He was, by all accounts, a friend trying to look out for someone he cared about. That night, when he showed up and saw how Parms was behaving toward the girl, something in him pushed back. We don't know if he confronted Parms directly with accusations, or if it started as something smaller that spiraled. But the fact that witnesses describe a tense disagreement specifically about how Parms was treating her tells you Minnieweather wasn't staying quiet. That's a hard thing to sit with. A 15-year-old trying to protect a friend from an adult who, according to investigators, should never have been anywhere near her, and that decision may have cost him his life. Meanwhile, the girl at the center of all this remains, in the public record, a minor who police say was allegedly being targeted and manipulated by someone 3 times her age. She's not the mystery here. She's not the puzzle to solve. She's a young person caught in the middle of something an adult allegedly engineered. And whatever happened to Minnieweather that night, it happened because he stepped into that situation. So by the time police started actively searching for Minnieweather, they weren't just looking for a missing teenager. They were looking at a man who had motive to make sure nobody asked too many questions. And the evidence that surfaced next would make that theory very hard to ignore. Here's where the case stops being about a disappearance and starts looking like something carefully covered up. Investigators pulled surveillance footage from the area, and what they found lines up in a way that's almost impossible to explain away. The footage allegedly shows a man matching Parms's build riding a small children's bike, the same kind of bike Minnieweather had ridden to the girl's house, away from the scene. He gets off, throws the bike into some bushes. Then he starts removing items, a black mask, gloves, a t-shirt. He drops them into trash cans along the way. Now here's the detail that investigators say sealed it for them. At the exact moment he pulled off that mask on camera, detectives say they immediately recognized his face. That's the kind of break that can crack open an entire case. A single unguarded second caught on a lens nobody thought was watching. But he wasn't done. Later footage reportedly shows him returning, driving back to those same trash cans to retrieve the items he ditched, then loading them into his truck. Why come back? If you're trying to distance yourself from a crime scene, every additional trip you make is another risk, another chance of being seen. Unless leaving that evidence out, there was somehow a bigger risk than retrieving it. That's the kind of decision that says more about urgency and panic than it does about innocence. Then comes the cleanup. Investigators say they watched him wiping down sections of his truck with a rag. When they tested those areas, the stains matched blood, not a small trace, either described as large amounts that had already soaked into the surfaces. That same kind of heavy staining was found at the location where witnesses said the violent confrontation took place, corroborating what people had heard and described that night. Piece by piece, the picture investigators built wasn't just a fight that got out of hand. It was a sequence of violent altercation, a body disposed of, evidence discarded, evidence retrieved, a vehicle cleaned. That's not panic. According to the warrant, that's planning. Enough that prosecutors are treating this as first-degree murder, with language suggesting Parms was already engaged in an act of cruelty toward a minor at the moment Minnieweather was killed. And yet, after all of that, after the footage, the blood evidence, the timeline stitched together hour by hour, there's still one enormous piece missing. Ja'Derrius Minnieweather's body has never been found. Search teams have covered close to 1,000 acres. Thick woods, high grass, areas beneath bridges, an abandoned church behind a Salvation Army building. They even brought in sonar and imaging equipment to scan inside a large concrete structure removed from near Parms' property, and came up with nothing. Legal experts say murder convictions without a recovered body are rare, but not impossible, especially when surrounding evidence is this strong. Still, for Ja'Derrius' family, strong evidence isn't the same as bringing him home. They are still waiting. The community is still searching. And somewhere, the truth of exactly where he is remains the one thing nobody has been able to answer. So where does that leave us? A 15-year-old boy who, by every account, was trying to protect someone he cared about. A grown man who allegedly spent weeks building a secret, exploitive relationship with a teenage girl, and who, according to investigators, reacted to being confronted about it with violence so severe that witnesses heard someone begging him to stop. A cleanup operation methodical enough to involve discarded clothing, a wiped-down truck, and a return trip to retrieve evidence. And still, after all of that, no body, no final resting place for a boy his family is still hoping to bring home. I want you to sit with a few questions, because I think they say something about how cases like this unfold in real life, not just in the movies. Why did Parms come back for the evidence instead of leaving it behind for good? Was it fear of being traced or something else? Guilt, attachment to those items, a miscalculation about how thoroughly he thought he covered his tracks? And what does it say about how isolated and confident an abuser can become that he believed he could walk away from something this violent without consequence? There's also the matter of the girl in this story. Investigators describe her as someone allegedly being groomed and exploited for weeks before any of this happened. How many people around her might have seen small signs, an older man's attention, gifts, secrecy, without realizing what they were looking at? That's not a flaw in her. That's how grooming is designed to work. Quietly, in plain sight, until something or someone forces it into the open. In this case, it may have been Ja'Derrius himself who forced it into the open, and it may be what cost him his life. And then there's the hardest question of all. If the evidence laid out in this warrant holds up, the footage, the blood, the timeline, what does it take for a community to actually bring a missing child home when the person responsible refuses to say where he left him? This case isn't finished. The search continues. The legal process is just beginning, and until Ja'Derrius is found, his story isn't something any of us should let fade into the next headline. If this case affected you the way it affected me, I want to hear your theories in the comments. What do you think happened to the evidence search teams haven't found yet? Where do you think the answers are still hiding? Drop your thoughts below, and if you want to keep following cases like this, cases where real families are still waiting for real answers, subscribe to Mystora Crimes. We'll keep telling these stories until the world remembers the names behind them.